Is the Kremlin committing war crimes in Ukraine? Moscow is accused of a civilian massacre near Kiev. Russia says it's a setup. The West is calling for an investigation. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the alleged atrocities in Ukraine. When Russian troops withdrew from the town of Bucha, just a few miles outside of Kiev, the true scale of devastation became clear. The small commuter town with a population of just over 35,000 is now in ruins. And while the footage of bombed-out buildings is horrific enough, it's the images of civilians lying dead on the streets that sparked international outrage. Some of the bodies appear to have their hands tied behind their backs, and hundreds of others have reportedly been found in mass graves. Paying witness to the devastation in Bucha, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky accused the Kremlin of genocide.
These are war crimes, and they will be recognized by the world as genocide. You're here today and can see what happened. We know of thousands of people killed and tortured, with severed limbs, raped women, murdered children. I think this is a genocide.
Well, President Zelensky has called for tougher sanctions on Moscow. Several Russian diplomats have already been expelled from Western nations, including Germany, France, and Italy, over Russia's attack. And U.S. President Joe Biden, one of Vladimir Putin's fiercest critics, once again called Putin a war criminal and demanded an investigation into alleged war crimes in Bucha.
You may remember I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal. Well, the truth of the matter is so what happened in Bucha. This warrants him, he is a war criminal. But we have to gather the information. We have to continue to provide Ukraine with the weapons they need to continue the fight. And we have to gather all the detail so this can be have a war crime trial. This guy is brutal. And what's happening in Bucha is outrageous. And everyone's seen it.
Well, the Kremlin denies it's committed the mass murder of civilians. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov instead accused Kiev of staging the scenes in an attempt to undermine Moscow.
The other day, another fake news attack was undertaken in the town of Bucha in the Kiev region. It was after the Russian military had left according to the plans and agreements. Several days later, a fake video was staged that is now being spread through all media channels and social media by the Ukrainian representatives and their Western patrons.
Now, if you look carefully at what you see in Bucha, about the corpses that lie on the streets, that were never existing before the Russian troops arrived, before they left, and suddenly they appear on the streets, lying on the road, one by one, right and left. Some of them are moving. Some of them are showing the signs of life. You cannot escape from an understanding that that is a stage. That is a stage, that is a fake, that this is a provocation. From the very beginning, it has been clear that this is nothing else but yet another staged provocation aimed at discrediting and dehumanizing of the Russian military and leveling political pressure on Russia. And from the very beginning, it has been clear that this is nothing else but yet another staged provocation aimed at discrediting and dehumanizing of the Russian military and leveling political pressure on Russia.
And it's not just Russian leadership making those claims. Listen to this report from Russian state TV.
The West is using Bucha to legalize future purges in areas previously occupied by the Russian army. The people were killed by Ukrainian forces because they didn't resist the Russians. The West is thus giving Ukraine approval to extrajudicial killings of those they deem traitors.
So, with Russia not just denying that its troops have committed war crimes, but actually blaming Ukraine for atrocities, could there even be a case for prosecution? Well, joining me now is UK barrister Sir Geoffrey Nice, who led the prosecution of former Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic at The Hague. Thank you so much for being with us. So, from the images and reports that you've seen over the last 6 weeks now, how certain are you that war crimes have indeed been committed and, more importantly, that there might be scope for effective prosecution?
I've been certain from the beginning of both. And I think that international politicians and commentators have sometimes been overgenerous to Russia in even allowing the possibility that these are not war crimes that we can see on the screen, or that there might not be scope for prosecution. Dividing that answer into two parts, the material provided by media, by individuals, is all material that can be usable in any of the courts that might try this issue. That material shows without doubt that from a very early stage, civilians and their dwellings had been the subject of destructive and lethal attack. That is enough for a war crime.
Would you, though, go as far, as some already have, as to use the term genocide? Do you feel that's appropriate here?
Genocide is a much more difficult term to use and a much more difficult crime to prove. And it's very important for your viewers to understand that genocide, although it's thought of as the worst of all crimes, the crime of crimes, it does not necessarily involve acts that are worse, that are more wicked than the same acts qualifying as crimes against humanity. Genocide requires a particular mental state on the part of the perpetrator. In this case, we are really only concerned with Putin, but also, I suppose, with other people further down the chain of command. And proving that very particular mental state is not as easy as proving the other crimes with which he could rightly be charged. I can completely understand how, in these days, the president of Ukraine wishes genocide to be considered. And of course, it should be borne in mind that there is an existing action under the Genocide Convention between Ukraine and Russia. So the matter should be considered, but it is not ever going to be as easy to prove as the other crimes. But I repeat, your viewers should not think that failure to be able to prove genocide as opposed to proving the other crimes is showing anything less wicked as against Russia.
Understood. Understood. So for right now, though, the defense within the media from Russia has been absolute denial. And they, in fact, say that these crimes, what we've seen on video, we've seen on footage in the news, has all been staged. Can you explain to us if there actually is a chance for that to have happened from the evidence you've seen and what has been looked at so far by people in the legal field where you stand? We remember as well that Australia actually at one point accused China of circulating fake images of war crimes in Afghanistan a few years ago. So how credible is it when Russia says that this is fake news?
Not very, if at all. And allegations of fake crime is a commonplace of war. It's part of the language of war. To take a simple example, of course, if somebody is found with his hands tied behind his back and shot in the head, it's pretty difficult to see how that could have been faked, other than by the Ukrainians taking an innocent person and making him a victim for that particular purpose of using the image of him to show a crime against Russia or by Russia. And I think a very, very important point to bear in mind, given the number of lawyers of all kinds who've perhaps been overgenerous to Russia in their analysis of events, it's very important to remember not to seek out or find doubt where there is for it. If a witness says something your prima facie position, your first position should be to accept that the witness is telling you something that happened, is telling you the truth. And also, if it's a mother who says her son was killed, and as we heard on another channel, it may be repeated on your channel, killed, buried, she had to wrap him in a blanket herself and bury him herself. Are we going to say she may have made that all up and we shouldn't believe it?
Okay.
No. Live witnesses of these terrible events
They must be heard.
Okay.
I have two more questions for you.
No, they must be heard. No, they must be heard. And the first position should be to accept them. Only if there is reason for doubt do you not accept
Understood.
them. That's the important point.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I mean, how possible or even likely is it, though, that those who have committed war crimes will get away with it? I mean, if we remember, the United Nations investigated several chemical weapons attacks in Syria. It was shown prohibited chemical weapons were used. That constitutes a war crime. Still, nothing has been done.
Well, unhappily, it is highly possible, and who knows, it may be probable, that perpetrators of war crimes will get away with it. Let's assume there's a complete case against Putin himself. Unless there's a regime change or other reason for handing him over, then he may never be tried. That will be a matter of immense disappointment, sadness, and worse for victims. And to some degree, it will have an effect on the rest of us. But I don't think we should overstate the importance of individuals being tried, given that for me, and I think for the people of Ukraine, in the long run, what is most important is that the international community, all of us, should make it quite clear from the beginning, now and throughout, that Russia is the villain, Russia is the criminal, or rather Russia under Putin is the villain and criminal, and that Ukraine is blameless. And that point is critically valuable to nations emerging from conflict if they want to move forward. And I'm like, can I make one more point?
Certainly. The
international criminal tribunals that came into being in 1993 and 4 for Yugoslavia and Rwanda very properly tried to try everyone on all sides of the conflict. So if you take a football analogy, they were looking not just at the captain or the manager of the team, but they were looking at those who might get red cards or yellow cards. That had a very unfortunate effect because it meant that those individuals were able to keep the conflict alive by the defenses they ran, however silly they were. And the consequences for example, Bosnia, has been that the conflict is not resolved in the way it should be, with a complete and clear finding that one party, Serbia, and the Serbs of both Serbia and Republic of Serbia are wholly to blame for what happened to Bosnia. Now, what we want we want a clear result for Ukraine in the way that the Nuremberg trials, criticized though they may be, brought a very clear result for the Allies, who were then able to move forward.
Understood. I have one final question for you. I wish it were quicker. It is rather complex, but I feel it's important because of your experience in prosecuting former Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic. Do you see similarities now between what Russian people believe right now and what they're being told on their news channels versus what Serbian people believed during the Balkan Wars, not least about the Srebrenica massacre?
You're completely right to raise that as a worrying precedent. And yes, there are real similarities. And as to Srebrenica, it was both fascinating and appalling that although for a short period of time following the use in the trial of a film of the killing of 6 young men from Srebrenica, the popular understanding in Serbia changed from being that the whole thing was a setup, fake, if you like, in the way that Russia is saying evidence is fake now, So it changed for a short period of time in favor of accepting that Srebrenica was indeed a wicked and criminal massacre. It's gone back. The power of asserting fake news, the power of propaganda to persuade a population that things are other than they actually are, should never be underestimated. And I do fear that what you're likely to hear or see from the people of Russia, following on what is said by Putin, may be not dissimilar to what has happened so unfortunately, unhappily, and tragically in the comprehension by the Serbs of their culpability for Srebrenica.
Sir Jeffrey Nice, we are unfortunately going to have to end it there. I'd like to thank you so much for being with us on the Newsmakers.
My pleasure.
Greatly appreciated. So let's get more perspective and opinion now on what's happening in Ukraine. Peter Zalmayev is the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, a nonprofit organization aiming to reinforce democratic institutions in post-Soviet countries. And from Moscow, Sergei Markov, a political analyst and former member of the Russian parliament. Thanks both so much for being with us. Sergei, you know, we just heard the case, or a case, for why your president should actually face war crimes charges in international court. Why does that sound ludicrous to you?
It's what we expected. We understand very well that Russian army tried to surround now Ukrainian army to crash and then to start a real denazification of Ukraine and crushing pro-American puppet regime in Ukraine. And of course, Americans try to protect own puppets, own slaves. And it's clear that Americans very professional organizing different fake news, as Donald Trump many times told. And they organize this as they understand what really happened in Bucha. And in March 30th, Russian army left Bucha very normally, in peace and quiet, without any clashes with Ukrainian army. And then
Sergei, can I ask you, though, because this was, if you did hear the previous interview, it was with one of the lead prosecutors in the case against Slobodan Milosevic, where he was found guilty of war crimes. He made a comparison to what Russians are identifying as staged or fake news with what Serbians had identified as staged or fake news in the case of the Srebrenica massacre. As you know, in court, it came out as those images and everything that had happened being proven. Do you fear now, seeing what you've seen, that there could be a chance that there will be criminal prosecution of your leadership based on what's happened in Bucha?
Only if there will be prisoners and the Americans will control everything. For us, it's absolutely clear that more than 100 people in Bucha have been killed by Ukrainian intelligence service for the specific thing, because they took humanitarian aid from Russian army, which Vladimir Zelensky prohibited them to take. They, first of all, Ukrainian soldiers come, then they kill these people, and then they claim Russia for doing this. And it's absolutely clear, organized. Okay. There are a lot of evidence which proves this fact. A lot of evidence. If your media show this evidence to your auditors, they are absolutely clear for everybody who has minimum information about this, that Ukrainian army kills these people, and they blame Russia for war crime because it's part of the hybrid war against Russia.
Okay, let's speak to Peter from inside the country. I mean, Peter, what do you know about what happened in Bucha, and why? I mean, should Putin, do you think, fear prosecution at this point?
Andrea, let me just reflect on what the previous speaker said. You know, and Mr. Markov is known as an unreflexive kind of defender and apologist for the, all the crimes of the Russian Federation. We saw in 2014, Russia never took responsibility over the downing of the Malaysian Boeing, MH16. Obviously, they don't take credit for anything. They lie at every step of the way. No one believes Russians anymore. Bucha, don't take it from Americans. Don't take it from Ukrainians. There are lots of international reporters there right now. I was on a talk show last night on Indian TV. India, is friendly to Putin's regime, or has been friendly up until now. They are actually having their eyes open. Their reporter was on the ground and he said, "Folks, this could not be made up." The Russians are claiming that all of this is a staged operation. So you're talking about hundreds of people with their hands tied behind their back, etc., in Mariupol, and now in Bucha. Imagine the kind of conspiracy this would take. This beggars belief, and no sane person will ever believe it. What Sergei Markov is saying is only going to be used internally, because Putin is creating an alternative reality for Russia. He has shut down all independent media. He has shut down Instagram. He has shut down Facebook. So the Russians are getting a very different picture from what we're seeing. Everyone is seeing outside Russia. When Mr. Markov said that Ukrainians are puppets and slaves of the Americans, the true slaves are the Russians, who are actually prosecuting this war on behalf of one person, and that person is Vladimir Putin, who is obsessed with the idea of Ukraine. We just saw a very damning document, Andrea, which was made public, an article published on RIA Novosti, RIA News, by one of the Kremlin's writers and political technologists who a few weeks before the invasion, and he said, we are seeing that Ukraine is not just controlled by some kind of Nazi junta, but it's mostly populated by people who do not like Russia. So what we really need to do, he says, we need to de-Ukrainianize Ukraine, de-Europeanize Ukraine. This is as close as we've gotten to Hitler's concept of Lebensraum. Do you remember? A space for the Germans in World War II, whereby 40 million Slavs, including Russians and Ukrainians, would be killed to make room for the Germans. What we're seeing, Vladimir Putin is prosecuting the very same policy of genocide against Ukrainians. The parallels, Andrea, are uncanny.
Right. I mean, again, we're just hearing completely polarized opinions coming from inside Russia and inside Ukraine.
It's not opinions.
But, perspective. Sorry, Sergei, it is. It's perspective. You have a very different perspective on what is happening. Sergei, let me ask you this, though. I mean, if Russia's actions in Ukraine are fully justified, as you think they are, why are people now, I mean, as far off as Finland and closer by in Moldova, so concerned with what Russia might do to them?
Moldova are very much concerned because Moldovan government don't want to respect Transnistria Republic. Transnistria people in Transnistria Republic uprising against ultra-nationalists in Moldova who took power in, more than 30 years ago. It was the war. And Romania nationalists who want to make Anschluss of Moldova, they also want to take control of the
so are you saying Moldova could face the same fate then as Ukraine, that Russia would have a purpose to invade there as well?
Russia would not invade to Moldova because no neo-Nazi regime in Moldova, absolutely. They, problematic regime, but nevertheless more or less democratic. But what Russia can do just to make the final decision that Transnistria Republic has right to join Russia, because frankly speaking, 90% of people in Transnistria Republic exactly want to join Russia. It's a Moldova concern. But the biggest difference is that there are fascist regime in Ukraine and no fascist regime in Moldova.
Okay, Peter, we just have a few minutes left, and I need to ask you if you fear at this point that this war, what is happening in Ukraine, will start losing the world's attention. I mean, that is the ultimate goal, in a sense, of the war of attrition that so many people accuse Russia of waging right now.
Well, there's always this tendency to normalize things. People's attention span is limited. It's a typical and normal psychological traits that we humans share. But what Vladimir Putin's deeds dictate that the world remains riveted to what's happening in Ukraine. He continues to escalate. He continues to bomb our cities. The previous speaker talked about this. The previous speaker talked about some denazification. I mean, does that mean like 40 days after you're still denazifying Ukraine, bombing Odessa, bombing, Nikolaev, hitting natal wards and children's hospitals. That's your denazification. You know, the country that will have to be denazified is Vladimir Putin's Russia, Andrea. And I will just say, so Vladimir Putin continues to escalate, and I would not rule out at some point the use of chemical weapons, maybe even nuclear weapons. He cannot part with the idea that he will not be able to control Ukraine, and that will set off an unpredictable chain of events. This is, I think, going to be a final wake-up call for the world, for the civilized world, that Vladimir Putin's regime must be destroyed for Russia to become a new country and for all of us to live in peace.
Peter Zalmayev, Sergei Markov. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank you both so much for being with us, and our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @_Newsmakers, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.